The first person we come to is this man Abishai. Now, you may or may not recognize him. You met his younger brother. His younger brother, we discussed, was Joab. Joab, again, one of those fellows that had some good, but man, he wasn't really the kind of guy you want your boys to grow up to be. And this is his brother, Abishai, the brother of Joab. This is what the Bible has to say about him. And Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief among three. Now, the word chief kind of means he was the oldest of three. And he lifted up his spear against 300 and slew them. This guy's like the original Green Beret. Okay? He's one tough cookie. And he had the name among three. He was the name that everybody knew. Not bad. He had the name among these people. These guys looked up to him when it came to warfare. He had a name among them. Was he not most honorable of three? Yeah. Therefore he was their captain. Howbeit, he attained not unto the first three. David had four. We're going to talk about them next. Once we get through Abishai, we're going to talk about David's 400 men, or what was called his mighty men. And they were grouped. Here were these guys who were like, wow. And then these guys, and then these guys. And Abishai's not up here. He's not like Joab. He's not the leader his brother was. But he's not bad. He's got some problems. This is what the Bible says about him. Was he not most honorable of the three, rather? Sure, those particular three. So, honor is dubious. If you put me, here's Mussolini on this side, and Adolf Hitler on this side, and I said to you, I am the most honorable of the three, nobody would argue that. Nobody. Now, if you put Stephen, the deacon of the first church, on this side, and the Apostle Paul over on this side, and then I claim to be the most honorable among, there would probably be a huge argument. Because to my knowledge, Jesus never stood up and gave me a standing ovation like he did Stephen. And I have not done anything near what the Apostle Paul managed to accomplish in his life. So, see, that honorable thing, although I am still the same person, depends on what group you place me in. If you place me with this group, I'm the most honorable of the three. But if you try to move up to the next group, no, he doesn't make that. So I better stay honorable. It's kind of like what Jesus said to the Pharisees. When you go to a banquet, take the lowest seat. And then the guy who invited you will say, hey, what are you doing way down here? Come on, sit up over here. Sit up a little closer to me. And then you begin with some pride to take a higher seat. However, if I think myself to be wonderful and great, I place myself in the top three, and I go and I sit at the chair next to Jesus, and then he comes in and says, I'm sorry, would you mind taking a lower seat? Because I had saved that chair for this fellow here. Then I would, with shamed face, as the King James says, begin to take the lower seat. That's this man. Among his particular peer, his particular group, he was pretty good. He was better than most, but not better than some. And so we kind of have that. And I don't know why Red did that, but she made this other thing come on. Yeah. Let me see. Let me click this. There you go. Now, let's look at the good, first of all. We always try to find some good in everybody. And so let's take a look and see if we can find some good in him. First of all, he was one of David's fighting men. David had 400. And we're going to talk about those in just a minute, so I don't want to go too far. He did make it into one of those. He was one of the 400 of David's fighting men. So that's a good thing. He was fearless and loyal. We're told, for example, at one point there was a giant, and the giant was getting the better of many men. In fact, the giants had attacked, and David, at this point, Abishai jumps out because David was trying to fight him, but David's a little bit old by this time. He's up there in his years. And the giant nearly killed David. So Abishai goes in there, he rescues David and goes back and kills the giant and his family, just for good measure. He was fearless. And he said, David, you know what? From now on, you're not going to go out to battle. From now on, you're going to stay back. We'll go in battle. You stay here. We can't afford to let the light of Israel dim or go out. And David was considered the light of Israel. He was what everybody looked at. And so this particular man, Abishai, was tremendously fearless and loyal. As I said, he saved David's life on more than one occasion. Once having to fight a giant. He was a huge fan of David. I want you to notice fearless and loyal. But those weren't always good things. Sometimes, and let's take a look at this, here's the bad. The bad part about being fearless and loyal is sometimes you jump into something without thinking about it. He could act without thinking. What does David want? He'd go and do it. He didn't ask, is it right or wrong? David wanted something done. He was going to help him get it done. His brother wanted something. He helped. Look at what he does here. He helps his brother to murder 2 people. He helps to set up Abner, who we talked about, and Amasa. 2 fellows that he felt maybe didn't have David's best interest at hand. And because he was so fearlessly loyal to David, you could get him to do the wrong thing simply by saying, that's against David's wishes. So he didn't always think, and this is how come he didn't make it up into those other more honorable people. Because although he was fearless, and though he would attack like a pit bull, he didn't do any more thinking than a pit bull does. You say attack and the dog goes and attack. You don't know why. You told him to, so he did. And he goes and he tears this poor guy apart because you said to. That's all he knows. That was Abishai. He was the attack dog. And when you said go, he went, and he didn't come back until he engaged the enemy. And he didn't care how many. You read how he slew 300. He didn't know when to stop or when to quit unless David called him off. If David sent him in, he went in, and he didn't quit. He didn't come back until he finished his task. This was a very loyal fellow, but the bad part of being that loyal was he didn't do any thinking. David got him to help murder Bathsheba's husband Uriah. He didn't say, wait, we're talking murder here. No, David wanted it. It's done. So he allowed his loyalty to override his morality. That's blind loyalty. This is our third point on this man. Let's take a look. The best followers are people that might combine careful thought and action. Abishai was a man of action. He was a fearless man of action, but he was not a thinker. And so if you and I are, for example, the Lord, if we're going to be followers of Christ, we have to not only follow him, but we have to be thinking people. We don't allow people just to say to us, oh, Jesus said, no. We're going to read it and see. Did he really say that? Are they twisting his words or not? So we have to be thoughtful and careful people. When we read this book and people preach it to us, we have to make sure that what they're saying matches up and is true. We can't just because we're Christians do what Christians are supposed to do. We have to do the things that Christians are required to do. And if Christ indeed told us to do it, then we need to do it. We have to make sure that the command given, for example, fits us. Jesus said a lot of things in the New Testament. He said a lot of things in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that don't apply to us. Sometimes it applied to a specific person. For example, when he talked to Judas, what you must do in betraying me, go out and do quickly. He didn't say to the rest of us, hey, when you have to betray me, go out and do it fast. He said that was to Judas, very specific. So we can't take and apply that and take that as some sort of command. There is the part where Jesus said to people, don't tell anybody who I am. What is the Great Commission? We're supposed to go out and tell the world about him. So we can't go back and say, wait, I like this verse over here where Jesus told me not to tell anybody. Nope, I better listen to the one where he gave the commission for us to go out and to tell. So he said both things, but he said both things at two different times to two different groups of people and for two different reasons. So we have to sit there and not just say, oh, well, the Bible says. Well, yeah, but why is it saying it, and to who is it saying it? See, we have to combine careful thought with our action. We can't say, I'm loyal to Jesus, therefore I don't have to think. Here's what he said. And we read every word that he said, and boy, I believe every word, and I'm going to do. Well, you might believe it. I believe he said it. I don't believe he said it to me. He said it to Judas, or he said it to this demon-possessed person. He didn't say that to the whole church, and he didn't give it as a command for us all to do it. So best followers combine careful thought. There's a lot of crazy people out there teaching a lot of crazy things. Let me tell you, when I was a young man in the Navy and I traveled around, everywhere you went, there was some sort of a, quote, Christian cult. They said they were preaching from the New Testament. They taught some strange things. We have kids in here, so I can't tell you a lot of the strange things they taught. But let me tell you, very interesting stuff, how men like David Moses interpreted the Bible. The children of the day, they were called. And man, they were crackers. There were a lot of people who claimed to be quoting the book. Yeah, but you better look carefully at it. And when you compare what they're doing and what they're saying with what the Bible actually says, then you begin to find out they're making the whole thing up. They might quote a verse here or here, but they're not reading the whole thing in context. And context is important when we're studying or reading our Bible. So, like Abishai, we want to be fearless, that's true. And we want to be men and women of action, that's also true. But we also want to combine careful thought with our action. Why? Well, this is our second lesson, and it's built really on the first. Blind loyalty can lead to evil. It did in his life. He helped to murder 3 people because his brother said so. His brother said David said so. One time David did say so. But his morality was overridden by his loyalty. And so blind loyalty can lead us to do evil. And we have to be careful of it. People come in and say, oh, you know what? Why, if you were a Christian, you do this. If you're a Christian, you do that. You have to stop and think. Blind loyalty, just to do it because someone said so. Bad reason. Bad reason. Stop and think. Whenever somebody gives you something out of the book, make sure it's in the book. They could be making it all up, and we have to be very careful. Like my mother, before she got saved, used to always say, my favorite verse in the Bible is God helps those who help themselves. I thought, what a tremendous verse. That was my mother's life verse for like the first 50 years of her life. God helps those who help themselves. She came to me once after I'd been a Christian for several years, and she said, where is that verse in the Bible? She was going to show her. I said, Mom, I got to tell you, it's nowhere in the Bible. We sat there and we went through the concordance at the back of my Bible. By that time I had one of these Strong's concordances. We went through the Strong's. It wasn't anywhere. God helps those who help themselves. Wasn't found anywhere in the book. And she'd been quoting that for years as her favorite Bible passage. Now, what it taught me, being good, may have been uplifting, may have been encouraging. You know, you got to get in there. You just can't sit down and wait for everything to get done. You have to work. You have to work at it, you know. Even prayer, the hardest part of prayer is putting shoe leather to our prayers. You know, we've got to get up there and make it happen. When you and I prayed about these pews, we just didn't wait for the angels to come in and sew them all together. There was a lot of hard labor done by a lot of people in our church for God to give us these. Now, we all believe the Lord did it, and we're grateful for all that's gotten done. We give God all the praise and all, but we had to put a lot of shoe leather. And let me tell you, boy, I wore these knuckles out right here, stretching that fabric and stretch. Poor old Lukey, he would sit there and stretch that fabric, and we'd sit there and nail those things all down. Fortunately, the Lord bless, we got an electric stapler and boom, 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 made it so much quicker. But when we first started out, we had a little hand stapler, boom, boom. And my grip would give out, and so Luke would take over, and of course he's in much better shape than I am, and he would be just popping those things. There was a lot of labor that went into that prayer. Blind loyalty, not stopping, not thinking, can lead to evil. Well, I'll just wait here for God to do it. Well, God might be asking, see, God usually blesses our effort. He blesses when God will do the things that we can't do. Why would he bother to do what I can? If God told me to do something, why is he going to do it for me? Now, once I get to the point that it's beyond me, I can't do it anymore. Then he has to open the doors and bless us. My wife and I, for example, well, when we were roofing the roof, we had labor, but we didn't have any money. And of course, you helped be a blessing in that. And together with you, me, the Lord, and Luke, and Mom, we were able to patch up an awful lot of holes. And on the next rains that came through, we didn't get wiped out like we did in the first one, I'll tell you that. So a lot of times, that blind loyalty is really just an excuse, so that we don't have to, you know, well, if God wanted it done, he would have done it. Really? Really? But people sometimes talk like that, and we have to check and see what the book says and make sure it is true and accurate. The next group that we wanted to talk about, so this is our fellow Abishai, Joab's brother. Not a bad guy, but I don't know if you want to take him home to Mom. You know? All right, David's mighty men. Let's take a look at these. Go with me to 1 Samuel. You got to go all the way back to 1 Samuel chapter 22. In 1 Samuel chapter 22, no, I'm in 2 Samuel. No wonder it didn't look right. 1 Samuel chapter 22. And go to verse 1 when you get there. How could David get 400 guys so quick and so easy? David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down to him. And everyone that was in distress, everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented. Sound like the last election to you? Gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. Now, of course, their wives were there too, their children. But here's what an army. Now, when you think of an army, 400 men isn't the biggest of armies. I mean, Saul had a much larger army. The enemies around about had a much larger army. But here's David's men. They were loyal. These were David's men. They came to him because there really was no one else. Paul sort of takes this in 2 Timothy. I have fought a good fight. That's what David's men did. They were fighters. As I said, these were probably the original Green Beret. I would say the original Navy SEALs, but they're landlocked, and so we won't go quite that far. as making them part of the Navy. But we would go so far as to say that they were probably the original. Every one of them. Well, let me go on before I tell you too much. Let's look at some of the good about them. First of all, they were able soldiers and leaders. Every one of them had a special skill of some kind. Whether it was the skill of a hunter, the skill of a stealth, the ability to sneak up on people, the ability to just stand there and take a beating. Everybody had some special skill or training that made them very useful. These 400 men, because of their skill, could take on entire armies and still win. Even outnumbered, they were victors. And you saw where Abishai was outnumbered 300, and he won. These were men who could really take the fight to the enemy. And each and every one of them could. If one can chase 1,000, two can chase 10,000, how many can 400 chase when they're dedicated to it? So they put the armies of the enemies to flight, these guys. Loyal to David. Loyal. They weren't loyal to Israel. They weren't loyal to the king. They were loyal to David. They weren't loyal to David's kids. They were loyal to David. Every one of them. Loyal to David. They weren't loyal to God. They were loyal to David. They weren't loyal to the law. They were loyal to David. They weren't loyal to the truth. They were loyal to David. Some of these people were some of the worst folks you'll ever meet. The only redeeming quality, they were loyal to David. All 400 of them. Loyal to David. Bad. Outside of their loyalty to David, they didn't really hang around much together because they had nothing in common. They had no reason. Usually when you hear about them, unless David is guiding and leading them, this guy's off over here fighting these people. This guy's over here fighting those, because they didn't really hang together unless David was there. He called them all together, and then he would lead them out into a march. Otherwise, they tended to be very separated. They didn't have any commonality. There wasn't this brotherly camaraderie among men. When I was in the military, you had this commonality where the guy standing next to you, you're willing to die for him for no other reason than he's the guy who's standing next to you. You don't know a whole lot about him, but he's the guy standing next to you, and so you're willing to die. That's just the way it was. And everybody there knew that about. I had one guy, though, who wasn't willing. And so, of course, I had to let him know that I was willing. He wasn't. So we got rid of him. Because why? You, in a military action, you've got to be able to die or be willing to die for the guy next to you. And that was their commonality, was David. But when David wasn't around, or when they had downtime, they would separate, go their own separate ways. And so that was the bad thing about them. Outside of David, they had nothing in common with each other. So right after David, they all fell apart. Right after David got old and quit being a fighter. So what can we learn from these mighty men? First of all, greatness is often inspired by a great leader. They were great men and they could do great things because David did. Remember, they saw David when he was just a kid take on that giant. They saw David take nothing more than that slingshot, and they saw David kill Goliath, and then they watched as David picked up Goliath's sword and chopped Goliath's head off with it. That's why Abishai could go and fight those giants when David was older. Wait, I saw you do this once. And then he went out and did the exact same thing. Because they had such a great leader in David, these men would all go out to do great things. Why? Because they all wanted to be like him. They were inspired to be like David. Now, who's our leader? Jesus Christ. Shouldn't we be inspired to be like him? Greater things, Jesus said, than I have done, you shall do. Why? Because we're inspired by great leaders. If we read and study and look at his life, he will inspire us, and we too will want to do more and better things. And so here he is. Greatness is inspired by great leaders. find a great leader if you don't have any inspiration. Even a small force of able, loyal men can do much. As I said, these 400, although not the greatest battle number of peoples in an army, but they won. And not like, I was going to say Job, but the guy who, Gideon. Gideon, you know, God intervened specially for him, and his 300 men won that battle. These guys constantly won because they were so fearless, because they were so loyal. So a small force, read, and they never, to my knowledge, ever lost a battle. They won every single time they went out. And they went out against huge numbers and would always come back winners. You know, these special men, once David was thirsty. He was sitting there and he was thirsty, and he remembered the wells back in Bethlehem. So these men got up, drove all night, well, walked forever, all the way back to Bethlehem, just to bring David back some water out of a pool that he remembered as a boy. This was the kind of loyalty they had. And that's how come they didn't lose. They were determined. Even though they had to go through the enemy lines and the king was hunting for them, they still gave up themselves to go and get David just a glass of water. I'd say, hey, you know, the water here tastes just like it does over there. But these guys, oh man, David wants water. I'll go get him water. Imagine if Jesus wanted something from you. Could he get it from you? If Jesus said, you know, I'm thirsty, would you trouble yourselves to go that far in danger to get him something? Most of us won't go any further than, what if somebody laughs at me? Well, I don't want people to think. And that usually stops us pretty good. These guys didn't care what somebody thought. They were willing to die just to get David a cup of water. This is why they're called his mighty men throughout the Bible. David's mighty men. And each and every one of them was a special man with a special skill, a special loyalty, and they could teach us so much. We have all those special things in us too, because we have the Holy Spirit. So we too are special. We too can be mighty men and women for Jesus Christ. We have a better leader than David. We've got the Son of David, Jesus Christ. So this should inspire us then to do our best and to become known as mighty men as well.